or welcome back. I'm Heather, and my amazing co-presenter Latanya is going to be more present in a few minutes as well. Heather Woodford, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm a therapist in private practice. I'm a sex educator. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a dog owner and a knitter, and now you know everything you need to know about me, or really pretty much for today. So today we're going to be talking about, we're going to learn about stress, what the heck stress even is, how can we more mindfully respond to stress and make our lives overall better? Because stress is inevitable, but good health isn't. Yeah, that sounds good. Imagine that you're coloring some balloons. Thanks. So help yourselves. There is no wrong way to color these balloons, but I want you to think, so maybe before you start coloring, before you choose colors, close your eyes and imagine. I want everybody to do this. When you picture balloons, like what do you picture? And there's no wrong answer, right? Some people picture, I have a client who says to me, Heather, balloons are always red. And I was like, okay, you're not wrong. That's fine. Your balloons are always red, right? But maybe for some of you, it's like a stripy hot air balloon, or maybe for some of you, it's like a balloon with little stars and sparkles on it. There's no wrong way to color your balloon, as long as you can picture and visualize very clearly what balloons look like to you. Okay, there we go. Enough belaboring the point about the balloon. We're just gonna color away whenever you feel ready. So, and the reason that we're talking about balloons will become clear again in a minute, but not yet. All right, so what the heck even is stress? Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Anybody ever take a speech and debate class or like a speech class in high school or college? They say, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So right now I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. So today we're talking about the basics of stress and stressors. We're going to talk about stress response and trauma responses. Those are similar, but not exactly the same thing. It's basically just how your body responds to any experience that overwhelms your internal and external resources in that moment. We're going to talk about evidence-based ways to manage your stress, right? Because again, we can't make stress and stressors disappear, but we can learn to manage it better. We're going to talk about 3 balloon breathing, which is, you put a little trademark TM after this, because there's different types of balloon breath and things like that out there in the world, but Heather Woodford calls it 3 balloon breathing, and it will become clear why. I keep teasing this like a clickbait article. Click here to find out why there's actually 3 balloons in breathing. And then we're going to talk about mindfully chosen responses and creating desired results, building healthy habits. And those last 2 parts are going to be more integrated with and led by Latanya. So, all right, so let's keep this moving. So a stress versus stressor, right? I think a lot of times we think that these 2 things are the same, but they're actually not, right? So we oftentimes think like stress equals traffic, stress equals loud neighbors fighting, stress equals work, but that's not actually true. There's a difference between stressors and stress. Can anybody, well, it says right here on the stressors are what ruffles your feathers, and stress is what it feels like to have your feathers ruffled, right? So emotionally and physiologically. It's your body's physiological and psychological response to those stressors. So, for example, traffic. Y'all, it was so ironic. I had put this PowerPoint together, and then I was sitting, and then I went to drive here this morning, and then I was like literally sitting in traffic. I was like, well, now this is happening. But these things happen, right? Beyond our control. Money, bills, right? Pollution, economic or environmental injustice, climate issues, people like conflict, both for ourselves and within our environment, right? This is a whole other topic about how, especially for kids, right? Early childhood stressors in the environment can create long-term problems for folks. But that's a different talk for a different day. Even things that like we might have intentionally chosen, like moving or graduating or, big life events can create stress in our lives, right? Anybody ever have this experience? Oh, I graduated. Now what the heck am I doing? Right? Or like, oh, I moved to this different city. Okay, now who are my friends, or where do I go, or what do I do? Right? So there's no good or bad about what is a stressor to you. It's just anything that kind of causes that activation in your body system. So let's talk with each other. Folks on Zoom, you can talk to each other. either, take your mics off or talk in the chat, and then let's talk here. We have a pretty small group. What are some of your biggest stressors? Let's talk about that first. What causes stress for you? That, that engine light that's on in my car or whatever, right? So something that's like in the environment that's kind of creating that stress on an ongoing basis. We could get real socioeconomic, cultural, political here and talk about, I don't know, institutional racism and sexism and patriarchy and transphobia and poverty. All these things are chronic stressors, right? Just to remind you, well, we'll get into it a little bit more, but stress is a full body, a holistic experience, right? It's not just in our minds, it's in our bodies as well. All right, so sometimes, usually what happens when we feel overwhelmed is we might go into a stress response, right? And a trauma response. So these are some of those. Oh no, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to move this little box so that we could see that better. There we go. Okay, so there are, this is a bit of an oversimplification, but these are kind of like 4 of the most common trauma responses. So a lot of people know about fight or flight, right? Like your body tenses and you get ready, you might dump some adrenaline into your system, right? And you get ready to kind of like fight back against whatever the stressor is, which is not necessarily adaptive in this day and age when we have traffic and bosses and passive aggressive family, right? Like you can't always do that, right? But your body is getting ready to do that. Or flight, right? Like we get ready to like run away. So we fight or flight, right? But then there are some other responses that are not necessarily as commonly known about. And I really want you to know about these because if you've ever had an experience where you've like frozen up, there's been a stressor in your environment, somebody's been confrontational or rude to you, or something happened and you thought, well, of course, in that situation, I would totally fight back. I would defend myself. I would stick up for myself or the other people or whatever was happening socially or physically in your environment. But you found that you kind of just like turtled in and you like froze up, right? You went into like possum mode or like deer in the headlights. That's called freeze response. And that's actually a really, really, really common response. Freeze and fawn are 2 of the more common responses in our day and age because, again, most of our stressors you can't actually physically fight back against or run away. So what we tend to do is go inward, right? So instead of having an outburst like we were talking about on Wednesday night, we have an inburst, right? So we kind of redirect that stress energy gets redirected to ourselves. And that's a survival mechanism. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have done that at times, there's nothing wrong with you. Your body was just helping you get through that moment and survive, right? Similarly, fawn is something that is kind of like, we call it appeasing or people pleasing, right? And that is actually adaptive in those acute moments when you need to get through that situation. Think of like Stockholm syndrome. Think of like if you see somebody that is usually a really strong, awesome, badass, empowered person, and they're in this like a relationship that's manipulative or abusive, whether that's with a boss or a partner or a family member, when they feel disempowered and they know that they can't, like pushing back is actually going to cause harm at least in the short term, right? That fawning mechanism that like, oh, it's okay, yes, boss, let me go get your coffee for you, or like whatever. And you're like, what the heck is that person doing? Sometimes, spoiler alert, that person is yourself, right? And then when we see ourselves doing that, we pile all that extra shame and self-judgment and criticism on ourselves because we're like, that's not who I am. That's not in alignment with my values. Well, I want you to notice that that is the way that your body and mind, right? And maybe some of your socially conditioned responses are helping you get through that moment. So I want you to, next time you notice that you're doing something like that, if you're doing that out of a space of survival, right? I want you to actually have some intention. Can't force ourselves to have emotions, but I want you to have some intention of like self-appreciation or like pride or, relief that you found a way to get through that situation, right? Obviously, we don't want you to be in those chronically stressful situations in the long run. Some are more easily extricatable than others, right? But if you have a shitty landlord and you have to kind of like kowtow to them when they come over to get the rent, even though they haven't fixed your sink yet, well, that's your housing situation, right? So there's nothing wrong with you for having behaved that way in that moment. This is not a class on like coaching you long-term to change your contextual situation, but maybe we'll have a little bit of that later, right? Then in the moment, just notice that these are survival mechanisms and they're totally normal. Now, that being said, fight or flight, the benefit of fight or flight is typically what that does when we actually are able to physically respond to a stressor. Again, we might go into fight or flight mode, right? That doesn't mean that we don't feel the adrenaline and the heart racing and all that stuff, but like kind of evolutionarily or physiologically, what that does is stress is actually a cycle, right? But we'll get into that in just a moment. But so what I was going to say is when you move your body, you actually you work those stress hormones through your body. You work all of that through your body, and then you could kind of return to like homeostasis, right? Remember that term from biology class, homeostasis? Keeps your thermostat, your temperature regulated, your thirst mechanism, your hunger mechanism, your sleep, right? Getting yourself back to baseline. That being said, if you're not able to respond in well, suffice it to say, if we don't get the stress out of our bodies, it will stay in our bodies and cause chronic problems. We'll get to that in just a moment. See, here was the next, there's the next slide, right? What happens when we don't deal with stress? Oh, this is fine, right? Well, spoiler, it was not fine. What was that, Kevin? It's been your whole life? Yeah.
One, like what you were saying, kind of like accommodating. Like I'm like, that's also my whole life with every situation. I'm just like, whatever, it's fine. School.
Right.
I'm just in that, still in survival mode all the time.
Yeah. I don't know if y'all could hear, but Kevin was saying he feels like he's like oftentimes in survival mode where he has to just kind of keep doing the appeasing behaviors. So yeah. And some of that we have control over and some of it we don't, right? So it's both and. So what happens when we don't deal with stress is it stays in our body, right? So do any of these stress symptoms sound familiar to you? There's no particular order of these. I literally just like was Googling stress symptoms and I kind of put them up here randomly so that you would be able to see quite the variety. Now, these things can happen acutely, which in medical and mental health, when we say acute, what we mean is like in the moment, intensely, in that moment, short term. Or they could happen chronically, right? This can be something that stays with you, these symptoms overall, and you're just like, ugh, why do I get this like chest pain and rapid heartbeat when, I smell bananas or whatever, right? Well, it could be a trauma response from like maybe the mean babysitter you had always fed you bananas or whatever, right? So sometimes we don't know where these things come from. It's long term, but also these things happen in the moment too, right? So your body is like responding, and in mental health, we say what the neurons that fire together or wire together, right? So the response and the stimulus kind of get linked together. So then that's why like long term, you're like, oh, why do I have this random trauma trigger around bananas? Oh, okay, there's something probably in my past. And sometimes we can, in in-depth therapy, we can go and like investigate what that is. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter if you dig up the dirty, terrible, horrible, traumatic details. It just matters that okay, when I smell bananas, I need to take a breath, right? Like there's something that I need to do. Can anybody speak to like some of these symptoms that happen for you when you feel stressed out, or when like a longer term trauma is triggered for you? What happens in your body and your mind? Racing thoughts and insomnia, right? Your body's like, no, this isn't time to relax. We have to worry about the lion chasing us. Spoiler alert, in modern times, the lion is, did you do your taxes? Did you finish your homework, right? It's kind of funny, like the more you learn about yourself, the more you can kind of notice, oh, that's what's going on. And sometimes our body tips us off before we're aware of what's going on emotionally or physically or mentally for us, right? Like, so speaking of taxes, oh, good Lord. The other day, my partner was like, my spouse was like, hey, did you respond to that email from Joan? Like, Joan is our accountant. Like, before they even finished the sentence, I was like in the other room, like, oh, I got to go load the dishwasher. And then I was like, oh, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can feel the tension in my head. I can feel my heart rate increasing. Money stresses me out, right? It's such a big stressor, and just paperwork and bureaucracy. And can't we just be like many other countries in the world that's like, here you go. You owe $3,000 in taxes. Okay, well, at least I didn't have to jump through the hoops of worrying about whether I was going to get arrested and doing the deductions correctly, right? So anyway, stress. So what should we do, right? What the heck? Now we know what stress is. We know what stressors are. We know the difference. So what are the first things we should do? Well, one, give yourself, take a break, right? Take a breath. And then realize that you got to separate the stress from the stressor. Why? Well, because just because you dealt with the stressor, homework, taxes, traffic, passive aggressive aunt and uncle at dinner, whatever, right? Doesn't mean you've taken care of the stress in your body, right? All the the racing heart, the yucky cortisol and adrenaline and all those things are still just like floating around in your body, right? So what do we do about that? First, take care of the stressor, then take care of the stress. Say most generally, stress, like many other physiological processes, is a cycle, right? So it doesn't stay there. It's like your digestive cycle. It's like a sexual response cycle. It's like a breathing cycle. It's like a sleep cycle, right? These things happen and they're meant to continue happening cyclically. They're not meant to they're not meant to be like a train that is trying to go through a tunnel and then hits a brick wall, right? It's not meant to you're not meant to just sit in that traffic jam for the rest of your life, right? You're meant to actually continue through and complete that process so that your body can go back to baseline. Now, obviously, clearly for folks who have experienced long-term chronic stress, trauma, maybe illness, right? Other physiological factors that can affect the way that we process things. This can be, it's not always as easy as, oh, 1, 2, 3, I'm just going to go do this thing. But putting in place healthier practices actually not only helps us in the moment acutely, but it also retrains our brain and our body to know that we have options, right? Because a lot of times, in particular with a traumatizing event, what happens is we feel helpless, right? Because trauma is something that completely overwhelms our ability to cope, and it stays stuck with us. That's because we felt like we didn't have any actual options. We felt very powerless. So even if the only thing you're doing is teaching yourself one skill at a time, breathing, joyful movement, creative expression, whatever you're doing, that we're going to talk about these stress responses or the ways to get stress out of your body, even if you're only doing one of those things at a time, that's literally revolutionary because you are retraining your brain and body that it is possible to do something different, right? Rather than just go into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mode. So how do we do this? How do we complete our stress response cycle? Well, there are many ways that are evidence-based, and there are probably even many more ways than this, but these are the ones that I know about, and these are the ones that have some research and study behind them. So breathing is a huge one, right? Let's take a big, deep breath right now. I said this on Wednesday. I'm going to say it again. And I'm going to say it again in a minute when we do another guided activity. I will never tell you how long to breathe for because every body is different, right? Some people need to inhale for 5, hold for 2 seconds, and then exhale for 7. For some people, that's going to make you lightheaded and make you pass out and make you feel like, oh, I guess I don't know enough about my body. I got to listen to this expert person. And now I feel like I'm going to pass out. Whoa, that's counterproductive, right? So I'll never tell you how long to inhale and exhale. I will invite you to listen to your own body, which is a practice of overcoming the trauma response. Mindfulness, OMG, that's a whole category. We could do a whole class on that. We're going to do a class on that on Wednesday. So come back to my Zoom workout, or not workout, come back to my Zoom super supportive group, and we'll be doing an exercise and learning about mindfulness on Wednesday. Basically, mindfulness just means being present in the moment without distraction, judgment, criticism, etc. And when those distractions, judgments, criticisms come up, that's okay. You just return to the present moment. There are so many ways to do that. You don't have to just sit stock still, frozen in meditation position. In fact, if you tend to have a freeze response, that might be more re-traumatizing for you, right? So movement, activity, anything that keeps you present in the moment, okay? Bilateral stimulation. Who knows what this term means? Has anybody heard of this before? Bilateral stimulation. Yeah. So we can kind of rebalance our brain by stimulating both sides of our body. So here is something called a butterfly hug. That this can be, what I really love about this is it's super simple. You can do it anytime you want to, right? You can do this similarly. You can tap your toes in your shoes so less people can see you if you're in a stressed out work meeting, right? Or whatever, you don't want people to stare at you. The cool thing about, sorry, I could go off on the butterfly hug, but I'll leave it there. Google butterfly hug and you will find that this is, yep, check it out. Kevin's doing it fast, right? Victoria's doing it a little bit more medium pace. You sped your pace up a little bit because we're influenced by our environment, right? Some of us started off slow. So it's about what your body is asking you for in that moment. If you're real, okay, sorry, I'm getting excited about butterfly hug. I need to breathe. Look at that. We all need mindfulness. Okay. Stimulating both sides of your body, basically. You know what else is bilateral stimulation? Freaking walking, y'all. Going for a walk is bilateral stimulation. Exercise, so joyful movement. That's, obviously something we're practicing here with Meg. I feel like that's going to be kind of a theme connected throughout our whole workshop. And then with that literally moves those stress hormones out of your body, right? Connecting with your something bigger, as Emily and Amelia Nagoski call it. I have a cool TED Talk that I can send to Meg to send out to the group. But I try to keep this as general as a term as possible. This could be spirituality, it could be purpose, it could be motivation. It's like sometimes I like to ask the question, what gets you up in the morning? But that's actually not a great question to ask in late capitalist society, because what gets you up in the morning is, oh shit, I have to go to work. What gives you forces you up, right? On your day off, what gets you up, right? Wanting to do something to connect with community, right? So what was that? The dogs have to pee, dude. Your animals and your kids can be your something bigger, right? Your family can be your something bigger, right? Something that moves you forward and gives you a sense of purpose rather than just, I'm just here because I'm here, right? Connecting with community, group, or collective. There's a really cool episode. I'm very into podcasts, in case y'all can't tell. A very cool episode of a podcast called The Pulse, which is all about health and well-being. The episode is called, I think it's just called like, oh no, I'm going to blank on it, like flow or joy or something about being joyful. And then the person who is studying it found that one of the most common factors of things, which I think we can look back through human history and like look at many animals to understand this, connection, right? Do you ever watch? So it's either being a part of, singing in a choir, running in a group marathon, dancing with a bunch of friends around, going to a concert, right? This is what we felt so disconnected from when we were isolating in COVID, right? Even witnessing something. Do you ever watch a flock of birds or a school of fish and just feel so mesmerized? How do they know to do that? What are they doing? How are they picking up on each other's vibes? Look at this shirt. Look at this shirt right here. The world of caregivers. It's all these people standing in a heart. That's so meaningful because it's showing like the connection between the group, right? It's not just individual. So connecting with something that's community, group, or collective. Good touch. Again, I could nerd out on all these things for like 90 minutes each, but I'll just keep it real brief. Cuddles, hugs, and snuggles. Obviously, this is like consensual good touch with people and you feel enthusiastically interested in this, right? Not like being forced to hug my uncle at the barbecue and I don't want to, right? Cuddles, hugs, and snuggles. The 6-second kiss is something that's been researched pretty thoroughly by the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman, who are a married couple that do a lot of like marriage and family work, or marriage and relationship therapy. And then so they say that like just by extending your kiss intentionally into 6 seconds, right, when your partner comes or goes or whatever, because a lot of times we do that little quick peck, okay, bye, have a good day, right? When you have to intentionally extend that kiss into a full 6 seconds, that's the cycle of like a whole breath, right? You're like, oh, I'm here. I'm connecting. We're sharing breathing particles or whatever, right? There's like some intention behind that. Similarly, there's the 30-second hug. That doesn't have to be with like a romantic partner, right? That can be just like somebody that you care about or feel comfortable enough to be close with for that long. But that's kind of like, when you have a quick hug, even if it's like 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, you're like, okay, haha. But then like when the person hugs you, and you actually like relax and you like settle into that hug again, as long as it's somebody that you enjoy hugging. I don't know about you, but there's something just like so like resetting about that, right? Like it really just, oh yeah, we are here. Okay, this is like very silly, but sometimes I do this activity of like, what would your real life resume look like? Not things that you would like try to monetize at work, but like what would the people who love most about you say that you're good at? See, Kevin's a good hugger. That's good. Okay, having a good talk, right? This can be anything as like in-depth as like with a therapist, or just as like wonderful as like talking about organic tomato gardening with your neighbor, whatever floats your boat, right? So talking through something that brings joy, or just talking through your feelings, right? Just getting it out, right? Similarly to good talk, I would say good talk with yourself would be like journaling, right? Just writing it all out, getting it all out of your system. Creative expression kind of speaks for itself, very broad category, but anything that sort of connects you with your, can get you in a flow state of mind, also connects you with, oftentimes with your higher purpose, right? But it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be beautiful or perfect or gorgeous or expressive. It can just be, let me just get my feelings out on this paper or this clay or this piano, right? Crying, it's good for you, releases those stress hormones. Laughing, obviously, who didn't know that, right? If you don't have like an emergency list of like at least 5 funny YouTube videos that you watch when you're in a bad mood, I highly recommend that you make that for yourself. Keep it in a notepad on your phone so that you're like, this waiting at this bus stop and this guy won't stop being weird towards me. I'm gonna watch this funny video on my earbuds right now, right? Laughing, and then narrative, completing the story, meaning if this can mean literally like telling your story, or witnessing or experiencing or being part of creating, telling a story, right? So isn't there something so satisfying about watching the whole narrative arc of like a character through like 2 or 3 seasons of a show, right? Isn't there something so satisfying about watching a person grow or like get vengeance? Everybody like that Count of Monte Cristo? I love that movie. That book, whatever. Yeah, I know, right? All the things. Right. So something about like completing that, like you're journeying with that person or you're journeying with yourself. So those are just a few of the ways that you can complete your stress response cycle.
Today, we're going to be covering the details regarding what we talked about the last week we were here, right? Identifying the behaviors in need of changing, implementing. Sorry.
Do you want me to? Sorry, I was just wondering if you want me to put your slides.
No, because I decided that I'm not going to use my paper for my nerves. I'm going to use this click button here. Nope. So implementing new behaviors to drive that desired behavior, and then also like reviewing that data, reviewing that information, that comes along the way, because we know this is a process, right? And something that Heather did talk about is just, didn't.
That's okay. It'll pop in. It'll fly in.
Oh, okay. Some of the things that she did talk about was our stressors, right? And like just identifying those things. So last week I left you guys with the homework of like the 4 and 1, right? So I think that when you do your 4 and 1s, you start to realize, ooh, I'm more on like 1 and 4. I'm more on like 10 and 2, or whatever it is. The numbers are different, but you kind of like, if you're being mindful of those, trying to do 4 and 1, you start to realize where your positives and negative lies, like as far as how often you're doing this to yourself, right? Or how often are you providing that to yourself? And so the stress symptoms also come along with that, right? Something that she was talking about, like there's this cycle going on, and there's no complete order of the cycle, right? Like there's not, like you're not going through this list in your cycle and saying like, I start with the first step on the cycle and then I end up at the 5th step. No, like you can start at the 5th step and end up at the 3rd step. So just keeping that in mind. And this is why the process is a process, and it's lifelong, right? Like we are beings of learning throughout our life. So like school ends and real experience begins, and that's still learning through your experiences. So really keeping in mind, like I like to keep in mind, like when I feel tension is very difficult for me to like notice, or when my chest pain happens, it's very difficult for me to notice. So like I realize like I need to start my day with something like relaxing. I don't always have that opportunity because I do have a child. So I haven't found a way yet, but I do make sure I keep my intentions on like purposefulness, right? Like maintaining purposefulness throughout my day. I'm going to go really quickly because I want to get to like, no, you're fine. I want to get to like the hands-on part of it. So before we get into like, the nitty-gritty of like behavior change and like active change and how we successfully do that, again, we want to make sure we remember that it takes time and that it's not an event. So like, when you wake up in the morning, it's not like, I'm going to complete this today and it's going to be great. It's going to be like, I'm going to feel all of these things today and I'm going to stop. when I think of a negative thing and think of a positive thing, right? I'm going to be specific about this change I'm trying to make. And remember what Heather said, like, if you find that one thing, like, you've already won, right? You've got the W for the day. Like, got it, you know, I'm gonna hang on to this one thing. So I have input some of what Heather discussed, because also it takes repetition, right? And that's why I have forgotten how much I do enjoy other practitioners in the realm of the mind, the human mind, or the human body speaking, because it helps me to understand, like, that is the cycle that relaxes me and makes me understand me. And then, so now we're kind of back to trying to identify the behavior that needs to be changed. So I have here a couple of sheets that I'm going to hand out. Don't stop coloring. Keep going with what you're doing, but also just going to lay this next to you. So you can keep in mind, right, like what it is that you are currently dealing with and want to change. And you can, it doesn't have to be something super big. It could be something really small. It could be, last week I was doing my 4-in-1 and realized that when I'm giving feedback, I am personalizing it versus like being objective about it, right? So like being subjective is like our natural state, right? Like, and you can have those bouts with certain people, but for other people, like, you got to keep it objective and make sure you stay along the lines with them. So it could be something really small. Go ahead. Oh, 4-in-1. So before we can change, first we have to identify, like, what is our current status quo? And I think that Heather kind of identified, like, a lot of our status quos are like stressors or like environmental impact, or just waking up in the morning and deciding, like, I'm gonna get up because I want to, or I'm gonna get up because I have duties to attend to, or I'm gonna get up because I need to make some money, right? And then when we get up and we're thinking about each of these individual places, like, where did that put you? And then where do you want to be? So that is the current behavior is where you already are being brought out of bed for, right? And the next change would be, what does that look like? What is my desired behavior? What do I really want to feel like when I wake up? So I'm using a very like layman's terms, like out of like health, when I do mine, because I don't want to embed any thoughts, right, into what you guys want to change. So this is like totally off-putting. It's about a security practice, right? This example, it has nothing to do with our health, but it's a good example of identifying like solutions and identifying how we can implement change. So, for example, you're developing a security practice. You would like to identify the practice that are already in place within your organization and any possible obstacles to achieve the desired change. The obstacles you might face could be related to equipment, programs, or systems being used. So right now, I want you to think of what your status quo is and what obstacles, when we're talking about obstacles here, for you guys, we're talking about stressors. What stressors are you facing that are related to this change you want to see? About those alternatives, and they can be related to, you know, the people within the organization. So the people within your environment, they can be related to mindset. They can be related to information that Heather's spoken about today, knowledge or lack of, things that motivate you, things that she talked about, like what can you do? Those hugs, right? Like you can seek those hugs, you can seek that bilateral stimulation, those type of things.
Okay, so let me go back to, oh, I think I brought them out here, didn't I? Let me put this there. Okay, so you'll see, so this little image on the left here that says breathe in and breathe out. This is a common skill, and this is part of what we're going to learn, but I like to call mine the 3 balloon technique. So I want you to imagine that first, yes, Kevin's got 3 balloons. Correct. Love it. I mean, not that anything else was incorrect, but yes, absolutely. So I want you to imagine, close your eyes and imagine when I told you like what color, what does a balloon most look like to you? Your most quintessential balloon, that would be like a helium balloon, right? So, or something that, hot air balloon or helium balloon, something with lift to it, right? Not just like a balloon you'd toss around. Imagine that balloon is tied to the very center of the top of your head so that it's gently lifting your spine upward. It's just giving you an assist. It's not tied to your forehead. You're not, looking upward. You're looking straight forward or gaily forward, depending on your orientation. And you're just allowing that first balloon to gently lift your spine. You're letting your shoulders drop down and you're letting the balloon do the extra work. It's just giving a little 10% assist, right? So you've got yourself settled in with your first balloon in a comfortable posture. The next balloon I want you to imagine is in your belly. So put your hands on your belly. And I know that in our culture, we're often taught you're supposed to constrict your belly, you're supposed to suck it in, you're supposed to be ashamed of your gut, blah, blah. We're not doing that shit here. We are proudly noticing that we have a whole body, including a belly, and we're going to let that belly expand when we take a deep breath in. Okay, so take a deep breath in that feels good for your body. And exhale when you feel ready. And you'll notice that balloon deflates a little bit. Let's do that a few more times. The only thing that I want you to do that's any different from what you're already doing, keep going, is I just want you to see if you can make your exhales longer than your inhales. There's no right amount of time. It's just what feels good for you. When you make your exhales longer than your inhales, you are entering into, keyword that Meg already said earlier today, your parasympathetic nervous system. What that means is you're showing your body, you're demonstrating to your body in a way that's deeper than words or thoughts that you're safe now. So that helps release some of that stress experience, and it helps you get back into your centered, a good status quo, right? So get back to your balance, your homeostasis, your norm. As you do this, just see if you can notice one small part of your body that's relaxing. It doesn't have to be a small part, but one part of your body that's relaxing just a little bit more than it was before. This can be any of your pelvic floor tension. It can be your shoulders, your jaw. It can be maybe you were like doing some type of nervous or energetic like tapping, and you're not now noticing that just the movement is slowing down a little bit more. So those 2 balloons are doing their work. There's no right or wrong. All you have to do is just notice. Now stay with those 2 balloons, but open your eyes again. And I want to bring you your 3rd balloon. Where did it go? There it is. Yeah, I stole him. Sorry. Thanks, Meg. Meg was the balloon mama. She got us balloons today. Now, this will really help us notice, and I feel like Kelly's going to know more about this than I will, because she's going to talk more about body parts and breathing and diaphragms and such. But here's a good way to get ourselves back into noticing the whole body connection with our breath. So take a deep breath in, and when you feel ready, use your diaphragm, your belly, to blow out so that you're taking this air right here that's in your first balloon and you're transferring it into your second balloon. Ready? Make sense? So deep breath in that feels good for your body. inflate your balloon. So you really notice that when you do that, you engage those belly muscles, right? Yeah. And there's no right or wrong amount or way or amount of air you're supposed to keep in the balloon. You can blow it up or you can let it deflate. But what I want you to remember is that you have 3 balloons, right? One in your belly, one helping your spine stay orderly, and then one that you can breathe out into. And that's a great way to release some stress. If you're like, oh, rage, right? You can always practice imagining breathing like you're breathing out into that balloon, right? Okay, so that's the 3 balloons. That's what I got for you. Got a couple more graphics here, and I think Meg might have sent this out, but this just kind of, again, shows how it works, right? Belly out, belly in, and then make your exhales longer than your inhales, and just stay curious about your experience. There's no right or wrong. It's just curiosity. Is that cool? Are we good? Okay, thanks.
With the kind of balloon analogy, right? I think that it's good to understand like inflating your positive reinforcement. So like taking in what she's talking about, like taking in that, when you're taking in that air, thinking of positive vibes, we'll call them, right? Thoughts, expression, right? What you want to bring into your life, what you are trying, that desired. We're using the word behavior because that desired action, right? That you want to do. And then exhaling all of those like ones, right? All of those negatives, all of those thoughts that like you don't want inside of you. Again, this is affirmation, this is motivation, this is mindful thinking, and all of those beautiful terms that Heather was using earlier, right? So if you look at this and you're imagining praise as a gigantic, balloon or whatnot, you're inflating it with all those like thoughts, right? And then you're getting rid of, you're letting go of all of those negatives, all of those random thoughts that cause stress and, really are defeating to you, right? You're just get rid of them, pop them out, let them go. So I loved the idea that you had. So I wanted to like bring that together. And then moving toward, again, this 4 normal trauma response, right? I think about it as like toxic trauma, right? Like all this toxin in you, right? And you have these first 2 where we think about all the time, but we really don't think about these last 2. And I think that more or less we are doing these last 2 more often than we think about. And they become our norms, and they become our current status quo, because we cannot do these things. Like they are not appropriate, right? Like you can't walk through a store and just let go of like what we call have a tantrum or an outburst, right? And these are the outburst and the tantrum behaviors. Those are the ones like when you think about the behavior you want to change, like those are the ones like those you feel they are so inappropriate to you, but you are hanging on them and you're doing them and you don't want to do them. Don't be ashamed of that. Like everyone has that. Everyone has that, right? So we want to think about how can we figure out our freeze and fawn? How can we make those desirable? Because these are what we naturally, when we can't do these, go to. So how can we make those desirable? So, and instead of, people pleasing, what can I do? How can I please myself, right? In this moment. And sometimes it's like, I love the idea that I can have this, but I can't have it and I have to walk away and I have to let it go. And that can be frightening, right? Like something that is normal to you have to let go. Or find a way to take it in little bits at a time. So that is what you guys have kind of written down, right? You have your current behavior, you have the obstacles to changing that behavior, and you have your desired behavior. That's where we are with this now. And then we got to implement something. How are we going to implement all of these beautiful things that Heather has talked about, like these stressors, right? And I've heard this a lot where they say ease, right? So I like to talk about dysfunction, right? So I wear my beautiful shirt that we have at my school, right? It's all fun and game, or it's all fun until someone figures out the function of your behavior, right? Because once someone figures out the function of your behavior, they can get in front of it instead of being reactive. They can be proactive, right? So you want to be proactive when you think about those obstacles. You want to be proactive when you're keeping in mind your desired behavior. And you also want to be proactive when you feel those stressors coming on. And it's so much at one time, right? So if you feel like this is becoming a lot, you take your balloon and you blow it all in, all of those positive things in, right? Those 4 positives. And then you release all of those negatives, right? I did it really quickly. I didn't like take it in, right? You do those things. So now let's talk about how we're really gonna address these obstacles. So how we're gonna address these obstacles, it will be difficult. We gotta stick with it. So that's what I'm talking about now. Like that cycle is difficult. We might be finished with our cycle and we feel good and we're implementing and we're on the right track. And then something comes and trips us up. That's that stick, right? Like we're tripping over this stick because these are long learned behaviors, right? Like you've learned these behaviors since you were small. I like to give an example. I have a nephew. He loves playing video games, but he doesn't like losing. So he plays against his older cousin and he loses a lot because he has more experience with this game. So he'll cry and we'll like tell him, if you may need to take a break from this game. So he'll be crying and like, I'm okay. But he's practicing, like he's mentally trying to get himself to be okay with losing, but he still feels the feeling. So like he's in multiple pieces of this cycle at this point, right? So that is just a good example of like what it feels like to be trying to win, right? And trying to be proactive. So in some cases, our obstacles may be simple. Like I'm talking about, he's just trying to fight through this loss, right? Okay, so let's make a plan. Here's some tips on making a plan to stay along the lines of responding to your behavior that you want to change proactively, right? So make a plan, establish the alternative behavior. Then you can, again, use a timer or some amount of time to focus on to really keep in those positive vibes, keep you motivated. It can be, it doesn't even have to be verbal or statements. It can be stretching. It could be movement. It could be blowing into the balloon. It could be all of those different things, right? And then self-monitoring. This is how we're tracking and being able to analyze, right? So journaling, even like, doesn't have to be written. It could be like voice journaling. I like to like decompress. I call it decompressing while I'm driving. So like I think about all the things that I said in the day and think like, should I have said that differently? Well, really what I should be thinking, and this is what what I want to change, is how great of a person I was to be able to help this person through this phase. Like I cannot be perfect, right? So that kind of thing. And then tracking your praise versus corrections, right? Tracking your behavior that you're trying to change versus your desired behavior. Also, like, how often am I doing this? Wow, I'm actually not doing this behavior I want to change very often. It's not a part of my current status quo anymore, right? Like, let's have a party about that, right? And then pairing with tangibles. So something I said earlier, I said, okay, well, once you do all of the things that you really want to do, once you do those desired behaviors, have at it with that behavior change the item, right? You can pair your desired behavior with your behavior change, like that behavior you want to change. Because unless it's impairing you, right? Like there's a difference. Like now you have to like put time limits on these things. It goes deeper than that. But just to be like very simplified, you can say, I am going to use my phone in the morning after I stretch. And I'm going to reward myself with my phone, basically. Okay, so we just talked about how we can implement these solutions, right? How we can implement what these obstacles are, how we can implement a solution to these obstacles. We just talked about that and how they're really linked, right? How we can actually pair them together. We don't have to get rid of them. We just know we want to improve something about them, right? We want to make things better for whatever reason, right? We want to improve something. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's something you talked about, right? Like they're color out the outside of the lines and make your line bigger, you know? Like we as a society, we're like black or white, right? We can either do this or we can do that, but that's not actually how life actually works, right? So this is how I set it up, right? On your guys' paper, it looks a little bit different because I'm on this PowerPoint. So I just kind of made it like a little table for you guys to see. Current behavior, obstacles, desired behavior, solutions. Like you can get a notebook and every morning, like write down, like, this is the current behavior. It can change every day, right? Like you can just add on to those things. There's nothing is set in stone. Because every day your schedule changes, right? So every day your goal is a little different. So think about that. And then review the data. So after a week of like writing all of these changes, obstacles, desired behaviors, and solutions, look at it and see how relatable all of these things are and how well it's going or how much where you want to improve, right? Because there's always a little bit to improve. Like we said, it's not a event and it's a process. So like there's always something you're going to be changing, nipping at, you know. So just remember the key to actually improving is to understand why the changes are not 100% successful. And to do that, you have to look at something. Is it listening to your notes? If it's like just reflecting back on your week or your day. And then further to drive the new behavior you've implemented, you will need to continuously prompt yourself and reinforce yourself with those new behaviors, those desired behaviors. So kind of already said that with using Heather's example, right? Remember to change is a process. So it's an action. So we are learners all the time. So we want to aid ourselves in understanding the behavior. And to aid ourselves in understanding the behavior, we got to review what we are doing and see if the obstacles are actually really there or not. See if the solutions are really helping or not. I gave a good example. Moving on to following through is I want to grow my hair out, but it's been 9 years now and I still haven't gotten to my goal because I cut my hair, right? And I cut it because it gets too big, it gets too thick, it gets too hard to manage. All of these different things. So follow through. I have to keep follow throughing and finding solutions. Everything that confronts me, I have to like, what is a better solution to this? So these activities are designed to affect something within, your environment to help you change. Reflection, I'm kind of nailing that down, like reflect, because we are our own, like, what did you say? Like, professionals for ourselves, right? Like, so if we don't reflect and we allow other people to reflect for us, we're just taking on their information. Yeah, you're the expert of your own life. That is what she said. And then social engagement, right? When we're learning, we are kind of illustrating an insight on like what it is that we want. And then sometimes people give us a like or a comment and things like that. And we have to decide on how we're going to receive it and how we're going to move through society with it, right? So back to this, move the stress out of your body, right? Pick something. I love her stretching. Like that made my heart, I was like, I'm doing something right. She just got up. She doesn't feel like she has to stay seated and like do what I'm telling her to do, right? Like, no, everyone does things differently. She is actually joyfully moving. So I love it. And that is it. This is just what we've already talked about, ways to deliver effective behavior specific praise. So this is a magical equation, like talk to yourself in first person, like Latanya, you sit up there and didn't get too nervous and felt relaxed, and great job feeling relaxed, talking to people you don't know, you know? So that's it.
Wait.
Oh, how do you go back?
Person